Glenn Loury here. This is the Glenn Show. We're the black guys at bloggingheads.tv.
So let me just push this just a little bit. Go back to the point about the fiscal language. You know, in physics, time and distance is not well defined. In economics, the deficit, taxes, transfer payments, these aggregate numbers, personal saving, private saving, disposable income, all these measures that we talk about to undergraduates and that are in the principles of economics textbooks, the first year textbook, all of it is garbage. None of those concepts are well defined, just like time and distance is not well defined in physics. Space-time apparently is well defined, but not those other things. So our economic equations don't determine what the deficit is. Another way to think about this is we can talk about the math in our models in French or English and German, and what language we use is would determine what we say. Okay, this model is running this deficit, but if we use a different kind of labeling or language, we would say the deficit path is this, and the off-the-book deficit is that. Fundamentally, the model will be the same. The model will be the same independent of how we label it.
Well, I have a question. We're doing theory right now, and it's very interesting to me anyway. I hope to other people. And you're making a kind of relativity point. As with the analogy of physics, and you're saying that the nominal words that we use for describing the government's fiscal position can be switched around, and you can get apparently different answers, but there's a constant underlying reality that's independent of the words. And I want you to tell me what that is. What corresponds to space-time in the world of economic relativity?
Well, that's called the fiscal gap. That's if you put everything on the books and you ask, let's take the entire path of outlays, not label them borrowing or debt service or benefit payments or public, or government discretionary spending. Forget the words, just say, okay, here's the path of total outlays. Here's the path of total receipts. In present value, do they match? That's the government's intertemporal budget. And the fiscal gap is the extent to which that intertemporal budget and present value is not zero. And where the outlays and present value exceed the receipts and present value. In the US, the fiscal gap is about 160 trillion. That's what we should be measuring. That's what Congress should be talking about and focused on all the time. And and how it's going to get resolved. Now, there was a bill.
Those numbers are so large that I don't think people can get their head around it. That's 8 years of national income. That's 8 years of national income is the difference, says Kotlikoff, between what the government over the long term has committed itself to spending and what the government over the long term has empowered itself to collect in taxes from the citizenry. Right. That's mind-boggling. And one reason it's mind-boggling is I'm wondering how it could possibly exist. Why wouldn't anybody hold our bonds?
Well, I would say nobody should if they're sure. I would certainly not hold our bonds, given what I see here. There was a bill introduced by members of Congress called the it's slipping my mind for the moment, but anyway, it was to force the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, and other agencies to do this fiscal gap analysis, and it got nowhere. Only had 8. This was about a decade ago. Only got 8 senators to endorse it. So there's something going on here about politics. It was called the Inform Act. It was to inform different generations how they're going to be treated, and it never got much traction. So there's a paper on my website at kotlikoff.net under articles with Jerry Green, the theorist at Harvard, called on the general relativity of fiscal language, which is focused on pointing out, showing mathematically that no neoclassical economics model, no model in which agents are rational. The model could include all kinds of market problems, failures, information problems, distortions. But as long as the agents are rational, in any model that we economists write down, these labeling problems exist, and the deficit will not be well defined. The taxes, transfers, all these other measures I mentioned won't be well defined as a theoretical proposition. So our theory says we're talking about, it's like an emperor's new clothes thing. Our theory is saying we have, sorry, I've got some motorcyclists around here.
That's okay.
Yeah. Our theory is saying we're talking about, we're driving in New York with a map of Los Angeles. And I think we're going to end up in the East River.
Okay, that's a good line. I wish you could spell out the details of it. But first of all, I want to just underscore how I understand the theoretical point as illustrated by your example. So the government pays benefits to people when they're old. It's called Social Security. One way of looking at it is the government is asking if it can borrow money from me while I'm working. And it hands me a piece of paper that says, I owe you. And that's my Social Security guarantee, that piece of paper.
Your bond. That's your bond.
So that when I get old and I want my money, I come with that piece of paper and the government pays me my money. Now, if it does that, it has to enter into its book, we owe Glenn Loury $100 million, because that's what I plan to collect from Social Security. It has to enter into its book at a certain amount of indebtedness, and that'll go on the thing. Another way the government can do it is simply to tax me and transfer the money to old people who are alive right now, with the implicit promise that when I get old, it'll tax the young people at that time and transfer that money to me when I'm old. Right. And then it's going to look different. It's not going to be a explicit indebtedness of the government. It's going to be what? And maybe I'm not following it all the way down the line.
It'll be called an unfunded liability, but it won't be on the books. It won't add to the official debt. So this number that that they're telling us is the number that our kids have to be concerned about, or we should be concerned about on their behalf, is going to be a lot smaller because, as you said, it's like 1/8 of the true number. And it's
not just the Chinese bondholders who our grandchildren are going to have to pay. It's also my children who my grandchildren are going to have to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is an ongoing, every generation is being told, you're going to have your turn to expropriate your kids. It's a Ponzi scheme. That's what's been going on. And, we're getting to the point where it's now becoming more noticeable because the official debt, which is the only thing people are really paying attention to, the Social Security trustees, for example, have a statement in table 6F1 of their trustees report they put out every year. The last time they put it out, the unfunded liability over the long term, $53 trillion. The official debt right now is about $22 trillion. It's right there in black and white, an official report saying that, but they hid it way in the appendix of the trustees report, and the trustees didn't bother to mention it. And under Republican administrations or Democratic administrations, they don't talk about this number. It was Paul O'Neill, the former Treasury Secretary under GW, who put it into the report, and they haven't had these trustees, quote trustees, haven't had the guts to get rid of it. So they just try to hide it by putting it in the appendix.
The Social Security's unfunded liability is 56 trillion.
Might be 53. I'm going to misstate it. I think it's 53 trillion. Yep.
So Social Security by itself accounts for more than half of the total fiscal gap that you were referring to earlier.
Well, I would say if the way they measure it, it accounts for more, but it's actually, I would measure it at a much smaller number because they're using too low a discount rate. They're valuing these benefits in the future at too high a price right now.
Okay, technical detail, but I get the point. Yeah. So again, I'm back to my question. How can this be? I mean, obviously it's not sustainable. People worry about climate change. Well, how about fiscal collapse? This is not sustainable forever.
No,
something's going to have to give.